Hello from New York. Welcome to this Earnest Talk. I'm your host, Michael Maloof, head of marketing here at Earnest Analytics, the leader in consumer and healthcare data for companies and investors. Today, I have the pleasure to introduce our experts, Daniel McCarthy, Peter Fader from Theta, for our talk, Competitive Benchmarking Powered by CLV Ultra, Applied to Temu. At the end, we'll take questions from the audience, which you're welcome to submit at any time using that Q&A tool here on Zoom. It's great to have repeat Earnest Talks guest Daniel McCarthy back on. Dan's an assistant professor of marketing at Emory University's Gazetta School of Business. His research interests include customer lifetime value, limited data problems, and the marketing finance interface. He popularized customer-based corporate valuation, or CBCV, and has been featured in media outlets such as the Harvard Business Review, MIT Sloan Management Review, Wall Street Journal, FT, Fortune, Barron's, Inc. magazine, the list goes on. And I'm also very excited to welcome Peter Fader for his very first time on the show. Welcome. Peter is the Francis and Pei-Yuan Xia Professor of Marketing at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. His expertise centers around the analysis of behavioral data to understand and forecast customer shopping activities. He works with firms from a wide range of industries, such as telecom, financial services, gaming, and entertainment, retailing, pharmaceuticals, and more. Peter's written 3 books on customer centricity and has won several awards, including being named Advertising Age as one of their inaugural 25 marketing tech trailblazers in 2017. So, in addition to their academic roles, Peter and Dan co-founded Zodiac, a predictive customer analytics SaaS firm that was acquired by Nike. And since then, they have co-founded Theta to revolutionize how firms value companies through customer-based corporate valuation. So if anyone is qualified to speak to the customer lifetime details of Temu and any of these brands today, it's these guys. For those of you who are joining for the first time, Earnest Analytics finds the most relevant data on the consumer and healthcare economies and turns it into actionable insights for management teams and investors. Brands from Instacart to Peloton come to Earnest to better understand their own customer share of wallet, their brand preferences, competitor sales, and more. We make credit card, location, online pricing information easy so that your team can spend more time making decisions, not parsing data. So with that lengthy intro, Daniel and Peter, welcome. Can you tell us a little bit more about Theta and your findings? I'll let you guys run with it from here.
That sounds great. Thank you, Michael. We thank you personally for making this possible. We thank the Earnest team for being just such a wonderful partner to work with. Going way back before Zodiac, I mean, for most of my now, nearly 40 years as a Wharton professor, in some sense, I'm kind of a hammer looking for nails. Got some really cool models. Let's find some good data to work with. Earnest has been just an unbelievable partner. Not only to make that data available, but to really kind of push us to come up with better models that can accommodate more different business settings, that we can do more scalably, that we can look at many more companies than I could have ever imagined before. So as Michael said, our first company, Zodiac, where we'd be doing the kind of SaaSified thing, working with a lot of companies and giving them 50 fun things to do with lifetime value. Sold that company to Nike. Then we started Theta, originally around the idea of Dan's dissertation work, customer-based corporate valuation, working largely with private equity firms, investment banks to say, what is the value of that digitally native men's underwear company? Since then, our non-compete with Nike expired, and so we can now do the kind of tactical marketing stuff again. And it's wonderful to think about the zone in between, where we could do an analysis for any one company, but we could also look more broadly from, say, an investor perspective about how this company might stack up to others in the sector. And that's exactly what we want to do with you this afternoon. As Michael said, we're gonna look at Temu as kind of a focal example, just because it's a company a lot of people are talking about. young company. The data on it isn't necessarily indicative of what the future is going to look like. And after all, that's what we care mostly about. And wondering how they stack up to some of their competitors. We chose, judgmentally, a couple of different companies, eBay, Etsy, Walmart, just to see how, not just how they look at from a descriptive standpoint in terms of how much stuff they've sold over time, but from a predictive standpoint, what will they look like? What are the unit economics for their customers? And the lens that we're going to bring to this will be, well, the lifetime value models that Dan and I have been building out for quite some time. And some of you might be familiar. We start with some very basic notions of lifetime value. We emphasize the words RFM, recency, frequency, monetary value, words that were given to us from our forefathers in direct marketing, saying these are good leading indicators of future lifetime value. What we've done, standing on the shoulders of giants, but doing a pretty good job of it ourselves, is going beyond just simple descriptive analyses. And Dan, maybe you could bring the deck up and show that off a bit here, to build these buy till you die models, a modeling framework that I suspect many of you are already familiar with, but it's going beyond just taking just raw observable data and doing some kind of regression-y or ML thing with it, to have a very principled, a very generative model telling what we like to believe is the true underlying story of consumers making decisions and changing over time, and how they differ from each other, both in terms of their propensity to purchase as well as their propensity to drop out. The model's amazing, but it does have its limits, as you can see in the middle over here, that for years and years and years, we either ignored or downplayed or did a minimal job of capturing different kinds of covariate effects. So whether we're talking about seasonality, whether we're talking about competition, whether we're talking about COVID, whether we're talking about launching new products or changing different kinds of marketing activities, we'd bring some of that stuff in reluctantly. It was okay, but not great. It was very effortful. It was very arbitrary. It wasn't very scalable. What we've recently launched is kind of just the best of all worlds, as close as you can get to a free lunch. The idea of having our core buy till you die models. We're telling the same story about how customers are operating, but we're doing a much better job of capturing all the wiggles and jiggles around it. So if you think about the things that I mentioned before, seasonality, COVID, competition, there's a lot of stuff going on, some of which we can identify and put into the model, others of which we might not really know what's causing those wiggles and jiggles, but it's just as important to capture them. So it's basically leading edge machine learning meets these probabilistic generative models of these buy till you die, as we call them. And that gives us this idea of CLV Ultra. And as it says at the bottom of the slide over here, it's incredibly accurate. I mean, I'm blown away by how much better these models are compared to the stuff that I've been putting out there for decades, really. Really accurate. And because of the ML piece of it, it's really automated. We don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about which variables to bring in and so on. Makes it very scalable as well. Lets us have the opportunity to work with very young companies or very young cohorts in order to make statements about them that are going to be just as accurate as well-established companies. So the basic way that it works is we tell our underlying generative story, this buy till you die, as again, some of you are familiar. And if you're not, contact us. We could send you all kinds of information about that. But then we want to go beyond that to try to capture, explain, and in some sense, put aside a lot of the different kinds of covariate information. So Dan, if you can give us the next slide, please. So if you look on the right, these are the different effects that we're going to pick up. So we have this overall story about how customers and cohorts of customers are going to behave. But we want to layer on to that 4 different components that are always going to be true, but how they look is going to vary from one data set to another. Top one shows us the idea that not all cohorts of customers, time-based cohorts, are created equal. And in fact, there tends to be as you can see towards the right part of the upper picture tends to be kind of a drifting downwards of cohorts over time. That first tranche of customers you acquire tends to be, not always, but tends to be a little bit better than the next one, a little bit better than the next one, and so on. Being able to kind of pull that out automatically without having to build a separate model for each cohort. Secondly, seasonal effects. And so very often there's going to be different things going on through the year, some of which we can explain, some of which maybe we can't, but it's very systematic. It's very recurring. In many, many cases, for instance, you're going to see some big bump towards the end of the year, some kind of holiday seasonality. And sometimes you'll see exactly what you see here, bump up and then bump down when you're home eating pumpkin pie with grandma. And there'll be other effects too that could be related to other different holidays and events and so on. Third picture just shows you how those events recur, or at least are presumed to occur repeatedly on a fairly consistent basis over time and across all cohorts. But then there's going to be non-seasonal effects. Things that go on might include something like COVID, might include the company expanding its product line, might include changes in the competitive environment. The things that are affecting all customers, they're affecting all cohorts, but they're changing over calendar time. We want to pull that stuff out. And then finally, there'll be a tenure effect. And this is something we've observed for years, but we would tend to either ignore or deal with in a much more effortful way. That very often when we acquire a cohort of customers, they're very good. Now, we don't know why that's the case. Is it because there's some kind of honeymoon and they're in love with the company? Is it because the company is treating them real well? And that honeymoon lasts for a while, and then things often settle down. Other things might happen across the tenure that's going to cause customers to, become better or worse. Sometimes it's for observable reasons, sometimes not. We want to capture all of that. So we're pulling out all of these systematic effects. Now, in addition, if there are particular events, if there are campaigns, if there are just other external activities, and you want to capture them in some kind of bespoke manner, absolutely. We can pull those out as well if you want to have particular attention on them. But to have this systematic way to kind of pull out a lot of that noise to give us a much cleaner read on the true fundamental behavior of these customers, their tendency to stick around, their tendency to buy, what that's going to be over a long horizon, and therefore their overall customer lifetime value. So we're not content when it comes to describing companies just to look backwards at how many people have bought from us and for how long and so on. We want to look forward. And we hope that you agree that that's going to be just a much more indicative way to understand not just the health of the customers, not just the health of the cohorts of customers, but the health of the company as a whole. So as we wrap this up and then turn to the kind of the real meat of the matter over here, just to summarize, let me show you the pictures on the right. For well-established cohorts, not too surprising that we can do a really good job of capturing and forecasting what's going on with them. Again, if you look at the picture on the right, you'll see the Q4 2017 cohort. We nail it. In fact, it's really hard to see that there's actually two different lines going on there, the actual and then the estimates and the predictions from the model, the predictions being those to the right of the vertical red line. But if you look at the lower right picture there, that's a very young cohort that we have very little information about. In the past, we wouldn't even try to make statements about them. But by capturing all of these systematic effects within and across cohorts, it gives us the comfort, it gives us the confidence, it gives us the capability to actually be able to make statements about that cohort and have almost as much faith in it as we would for a long-lived cohort. And that's going to become really essential here, especially when we talk about a company like Temu, where they really don't have that many cohorts for them. They're quite young, and we really want to understand the future as much as we want to understand the past. So Dan, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that before we dive right on in.
No, I think that really sums it up well. I think the model is both more accurate, faster, and as you can see for that Q4 2021 cohort, it can be remarkably accurate, especially for those young customers. So I can't say how many times we've spoken with companies where they'll say, yeah, our models are real accurate, and they might be actually for cohorts that are 2+ years old, but if they're using these models for customer acquisition purposes, and those are not the cohorts that we really care about the most. What we care about the most is actually how well can we predict for customers where we have no data. And I think that that's where, this ability to predict for the youngest of cohorts becomes especially salient. But obviously the impetus for this webinar is really how we can also then use the same model for very different companies, young ones, older ones, and we'll have kind of the same general framework that we'll apply each time, which can lead to greater comparability of some companies versus others, and that enables us to be in this unique position where we can do these sort of benchmark comparisons, especially because the underlying data that we're using is also very comparable across these companies. So the Earnest data, it's very nice in that way that every single company has data in the same structure. It's all coming from the same credit card panel. So, we can kind of swap out one merchant, swap in another, and we're still generally doing the same thing. So I figure what we'll do in terms of flow is first talk through kind of what we saw when we ran the numbers on Temu, and then compare that to what we see for some of these other companies. It will seem kind of rinse and repeat, but that's kind of the point, that there isn't this whole different thing for Etsy that there is for Temu. And so we can basically run that same model, look at the same charts, and then both appreciate the goodness of the fits for the various companies, but then also be able to focus on the comparisons across the companies. That's really kind of the big thing here. So kind of the high level conclusion with Temu is that the valuation of the customers is good. Again, just to level set, normally post-acquisition value is a profit-based measure. Here, we're purely focusing on the revenue in the credit card panel for comparability across companies. So whenever you see PAV, it's a revenue PAV. And again, what PAV represents is the value of the revenue in this case over a 5-year forecasting horizon. So take every cohort, project out over 5 years, and then we use that to estimate, what this figure is. So you can see in general, when we look at these cohorts from October 2022 to October 2023, first, the company's been doing very well. The absolute level of PAV is quite high. We do see some evidence of cross-cohort degradation. Some of those older cohorts seem to be performing better. Some of the more recent ones have been worth a little bit less, but in general, the absolute level of PAV is quite good here. The chart on the right is one that we'll often focus on, especially when we're kind of doing analyses on behalf of companies directly. What it's showing is that there's this very large spread in the PAVs across the customers. So about 30% of the customers have very low PAVs. They probably bought a sticker one time and that was it. And so we're inferring there's not a whole lot of value to those customers. But on the right hand side, we see that there's about 5% of the cohort that is worth over $3,000 per customer. So really, really high value. And so again, very consistent what we've seen at other businesses, but this is in truth, in some sense, it's the lifeblood of customer centricity, because it means that there's great opportunities potentially to identify all the needs and the acquisition channels and the what have you that are bringing in and creating value for these really, really very good customers that could be potentially de-emphasized for the less valuable customers. In terms of how we get to those PAV figures, one way that can help illustrate that is looking at cumulative revenue over time. So what these charts are showing are kind of cumulative revenue and then cumulative orders. The x-axis is the number of months that have passed since the cohort was acquired. And so, we can see, for example, that this is saying that after about 50 months, customers that were acquired in 2022 were worth on average, call it $800, something like that. So, this is monotonically increasing. We can see that these cohorts are performing very well. This is also showing that if we were to project out even further than 5 years, there's more revenue to come, because this line is still very much moving up, even though it is starting to bend over. So Yeah, so in general, healthy signs, but we can also see, especially in the earlier months, the reason why our PAV estimate for the 2023 cohorts is lower is because they're not monetizing quite as well as the 2022 cohorts were. Just kind of further peeling back the onion, the way that we get the revenue is by first projecting out how many customers are live, and then how many orders do they place. And that gives us the number of customers that are active in different periods. So customers being active, that's just the number of customers that place one or more orders in a particular period. Obviously, when a cohort is first acquired, the acquisition event means that they placed a purchase. So everyone was active in month 0. But we can see that, as we roll out, just a few months, it seems like these cohorts are stabilizing at, call it 25% of the cohort that's active in a given month. And when they are active, there's a question of how much revenue they're generating per transaction. And that's what is being shown over here. We see that at Temu, when they make their first purchase, they're spending somewhere on the order of $40. And on the repeat purchases, they tend to spend a bit more. So it could be, again, these differences aren't very big, but it could be promotional discounts, or it could be that they're kind of dipping their toe in the water before being comfortable making larger purchases. But in general, customers tend to spend more when they make their subsequent purchases. And both of these figures seem to be trending in the upward direction, which is, again, a healthy sign for revenue. So so we kind of dial in a bit more into the distribution of the PAVs. One way that we can look at that is by kind of breaking the cohort up into how many times people were buying. And so what this is showing us is that about 35% of the customers at Temu had made one purchase, and not more than that. But the other 2/3 of the customers made 2 or more. And so obviously the customers that are making 2 or more purchases are inferred to make many more purchases into the future, which is why both PAV and residual lifetime value are dominated by these higher frequency customers. So customers that make 3 or more purchases, they comprise 47% of the customers, but they comprise 83% of the PAV. And that's just because pound for pound, these customers are worth much more than the one-timers. Yes, again, a number of different ways of visualizing this, but the question naturally becomes, what is it that makes these 2 and 3+ customers different from the one-timers? Is it the channel that we acquired them through? Is the product that they bought when they first came in? There's just a number of different segmentation variables that we can look to help try to better understand, when we acquire that next cohort of customers, can we find more that are more likely to be repeaters than one-timers? So this is going into some of the validations that we do on the back end to ensure that we trust the model. So again, this looks a little similar to the plots that we showed on the early slide that Peter shared. But it's showing for Temu our ability to predict data that we didn't train our model on. So this is saying, again, let's train our model on all the data to the left of this vertical dotted line and predict what will happen in the future. And you can see that when we kind of aggregate these predictions across all those various cohorts, we're doing a pretty good job of predicting, despite the fact that we don't have a whole lot of data here. And when you look at a chart like this, you may say, well, I could just fit some time series model to this. But what's very hard is to then take a model like that and actually get good predictions at the customer level. And so one of the validations that we'll always look to assess how good of a job we're doing at predicting individual customer behavior is to take all the customers and then divide them up and say, imagine that we took all the customers who made no purchases, no repeat purchases over this calibration period. How many purchases would we expect that they'll make in the holdout period? And then let's do the same thing for the customers that made 1 repeat purchase, 2 repeat purchases, and so on and so forth. And what we can see here is that we're doing a really good job of predicting for each of these, call them micro segments, how many purchases those customers will make into the future. So of course, if you took everyone who makes 7 repeat purchases, they're going to make more purchases than the people who made no repeat purchases in the calibration period. But we can say exactly to what extent that relationship will be. The main other one I wanted to focus on is kind of these bottom two. So what this chart is showing is what they call the cumulative transactions plot. And so it's kind of taking this plot, but looking at the cumulative sum. And what we can see is, again, we're doing a very good job of predicting what the future cumulative sum of transactions is going to be. And one way that we can summarize the error associated with our prediction is through what's called the mean absolute percentage error. I'm not going to bother you with a whole bunch of stat stuff, but suffice it to say, smaller MAPE is better. And so MAPE of 0.82 is really good. And we can see in general, these mean absolute percentage error figures are very small. That's very good. Anyone who's worked with these models before, I think, would appreciate just how small of an error that is. So let's repeat it with Etsy. So again, I'm going to go a little more quickly for some of these others because again, now you kind of understand what these plots represent, so we can focus more on the numbers. If you recall, at Temu, the PAVs were, call it, starting on the order of $1,000. Here we're kind of more around $400. So about 60% smaller than at Temu. So there is kind of this level shift down. We do see a similar general pattern here that across the cohorts, the PAVs are steadily degrading a bit. So again, that's kind of what we saw at Temu as well. But the big upshot here is that the PAVs tend to be quite a bit smaller. Same general pattern to the distribution of PAVs. We can see a lot of one-timers who aren't worth very much. But again, we can see that there's a cohort of customers that's worth a whole heck of a lot. Although if you remember at Temu, this bucket was at $3,000. Here it's at $1,500. So again, that's just a reflection of lower customer valuations. The company's been around for longer, so we got more cohort curves. But this is again showing us cumulative revenue as a function of the number of months since the cohort was first acquired. And the nice thing is, for some of these older cohorts, like the 2020 cohort, a lot of this is actual observed data. It's not coming from a model. It's just what we actually saw. So the amount that we're being forced to project is smaller. And so again, this gives us a sense of where those projections were coming from. You can see the 2020 cohort is this light blue line. It performed relatively well. You can see the orange line is the 2022 cohort, and it's like level shifted below. And so again, it kind of makes sense why we would estimate that those cohorts are have lower PAVs than those of the ones that came before them. And again, you can see we're kind of asymptoting around the $400 level, which is what is bringing about the $400 PAVs. These are the customer activity curves. So again, here we've got many more months of data, which is nice. Everyone's active in month 0, but you can see over here, we kind of stabilize down at around 10% of the cohort that comes back and makes at least one purchase each month. And it's actually it's a pretty good sign that at Etsy, oftentimes you'll find that the whole cohort will get killed off at some point. That just the whole cohort kind of stops transacting. But here you can see these are all pretty flat lines. That's a sign that when they acquire 100 customers, it could be that 10 of them, will stay around for a very long amount of time. This is average revenue per transaction, again, somewhere over $40, and not a whole lot of evidence of difference between initial and repeat purchases. So again, same charts over here, but again, we see just this 3+ frequency bucket dominates PAV. It represents 72% of customers, but 93% of the total PAV of the customers. So yes, again, we want to find out what it is that makes these customers tick. That's really one of the big things that we'll do when we're working on behalf of companies. The fits are again very good, and you hear the MAPE is again 0.45%. That's really, really low. Now, when we look across the cohorts, so these are the MAPEs by cohort, and you can see that the reason that this MAPE is very low is because we have extraordinarily low MAPEs for, especially for all of the cohorts through 2021. We do see there are some cohorts where the MAPEs are higher as we move to the end of 2021, the end of 2022. But even here, we're talking 6%. So it's still nothing very bad. And over here again, we're just bang on the money. So again, we were really very happy that with almost literally no tweaking of the model, we just kind of ran the exact same thing that we did for Temu. That we're doing really quite well, which again makes us confident in those pad figures. Walmart, again, I'm going to just very quickly go through this so that we have time for Q&A, but the figures are higher again. It's the bottom line. Again, we're kind of looking at paths that are back to something like $1,000. And here you can see those really good customers, they're spending on the order of $7,000. So there's a lot of really high value customers of Walmart. In terms of the cumulative transactions and revenue, we can see that these cohorts are doing quite well. Yes, again, pretty consistent with what we've seen before. We can see that, again, I love seeing a cohorted active customers chart like this where the lines go flat. That's really what you hope to see, or even potentially moving up. This just means there's a lot of people who are longtime customers of Walmart and are probably unlikely to go away. And you can see for the 2017 cohort, in fact, this does seem to be very slightly increasing over time, which is a good sign. So again, I won't bore you with these. MAPE of 0.92%. Again, same model. Just we've been astounded at these fits. And if you just look at this, look at all the texture that's being captured in this graph. It's just, it's just gorgeous. And look at this conditional expectations plot. Oh, this is just amazing. I get so happy when I look at plots like these. And great consistency of predictive accuracy across cohorts. eBay, you can see that they were doing a good job of acquiring high-value customers earlier. It's kind of fallen more to Etsy type levels in recent years. So they are kind of somewhere in between. Again, it's kind of backed up by all the figures that we've seen before, but again, I don't want to dwell on these because we've now seen them so many times. So I'll just kind of fast forward to this plot over here, and again, bang on the money. Less than 1% MAPE. Just very, very good. So there are some isolated cohorts, especially this most recent one. Again, this is a cohort that we had 3 months of data for, and so to be it basically like 10% error, for a cohort that's that young, that's still very respectable. And this conditional expectations plot, I mean, you really can't ask for anything more. And anyone who's worked with B2ID models before would know that this is very hard to achieve. And the fact that we're achieving it so consistently across all these different companies, again, should make us feel very confident that the pad figures that we're estimating are, that they're legit. So the next thing we wanted to do then is, we've got these estimates. Let's just make it a little easier to see how they compare across companies. So here we're looking at eBay, Etsy, Temu, and Walmart, and you can see in general that the Temu figures are looking quite good. Again, this is just aligned a little bit differently, because of when we ran each of these models. But again, you can see that they're kind of right up there with Walmart. And the average order values, I'm not going to place as much emphasis on them. Yeah, I think the most important one is are the PABs. And again, the big conclusion here is that Etsy has relatively low PABs. We can see eBay had relatively high PABs, but they've really come down. Walmart has generally had very high PABs. They came down a bit, but they've stabilized and seem to be moving up again. And Temu thus far has had high PABs. So again, that's a good sign for Temu. Again, all these figures are in terms of revenue. So I know there's been a number of articles that have been coming out about discounts and promotions and things like that. To the extent that the promotions lead to lower prices paid, then that should be translated into these figures. So these should account for those discounts. But certainly, we don't know the gross margin profile of Temu, and that would be something that you'd want to make sure to be mindful of if you were looking at Temu as a potential investment. So, yes, I think I'll leave it to that. Definitely, hope that was interesting. Gave a sense both of, again, the predictive accuracy of this model and the ability to apply it to this really nice data set that enables these comparisons across companies that I think can be very helpful in a variety of different settings. So this is really just proof of concept of how we can take a few companies and be able to get some sense of what good is. But take the company that you work for, take your main competitors. Imagine that you had the ability to say how you were doing along each of these different dimensions, versus your competitors. That's exactly the sort of thing that this sort of analysis would enable for you. So I'll leave it at that for now. We welcome any questions that you might have.
Really interesting stuff. Yeah. I love that note on how third-party data kind of levels the playing field when you're comparing all of these companies that otherwise you would just not get kind of accurate apples to apples coverage on. Thanks so much for joining us. So again, Daniel McCarthy, Peter Fader from Theta, they walked us through how to use credit card data to predict future value.